Welcome to According to Sam, folks, episode 390. Thank you for joining me. We're going to just get right back into what we were talking about in the last podcast. I have a lot to share with you guys today. Again, thank you for joining me. Hope you had a great weekend. But we've been talking about Jewish history in this podcast for, I guess, a few months now. And everybody wants to talk about the Jews right now. Everybody wants to talk about Israel right now. It's a very relevant and popular topic of conversation in many circles, on many podcasts, on many shows. The influence of Israel on American foreign policy, the current war that we were in, and I've been telling the story about Jewish history going back even before the Babylonian captivity. We were up to the Maccabean revolt in telling that history in this period of time known as the Second Temple period. After the first temple, Solomon's temple, was destroyed by Babylon, Babylon takes a group of about 10,000 Jews back to Babylon as exiles, and then the Persians conquer Babylon, the Babylonians, and allow a small contingent of Jews led by Zerubbabel to rebuild the Second Temple. And the Maccabean revolt happens about 400 years into what is a 600-year period known as the Second Temple period. It's also known as the silent years in biblical terms because this is a period of time where the Jews are not under Jewish kings anymore. They don't have any Jewish prophets anymore. The Tanakh, the Jewish text, the Hebrew canon, is closed after Malachi. And the reason that I want to get more into the Maccabean revolt, and we'll probably do that, if not the next podcast, in the podcast after that, to get into the details about what happens after Antiochus Epiphanes. We told a story about Antiochus Epiphanes and asking the question why Antiochus Epiphanes, out of nowhere, ignoring 400 years of history, going back to the Persians and early rule under the Greeks, that out of nowhere he just decides to start persecuting the Jews and storms the temple, erects a monument to Zeus, sacrifices a pig. This persecution, and I was telling you, it had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. People look back today and say, oh, Antiochus Epiphanes was the first Hitler, and he persecuted the Jews based on because he was an anti-Semitism and they're God's chosen people. No, that is a elementary way of thinking of these things. The truth of the matter is that there was a internal civil war going on in Judea between religious Jews and Hellenistic Jews, and they were fighting each other. And Antiochus Epiphanes actually chose the side of the Hellenistic Jews. But that when Antiochus Epiphanes raids the temple, desecrates the temple, that is what leads the Maccabees, the five brothers led by Judah, the Hasmoneans, to revolt against the Seleucid Empire, and they're successful. They end up, the odds were completely against them. This is a small rebel band that is fighting against one of the most powerful militaries on earth at this time, the Seleucid Empire. The odds were against them from the beginning, but not only because of the guerrilla warfare tactics that they were using, attacking the Seleucids and then running back into the hills, and the Seleucids weren't able to use their phalanx, their system of fighting that they were used to on these guerrillas that were operating using guerrilla warfare tactics, attacking the Seleucids, going back into the hills where they couldn't get up, and then just basically wearing the Seleucids out. So they end up becoming successful in defeating the Seleucid Empire, establishing the Hasmonean dynasty, and there were a lot of other issues that were going on. That's why I was telling you, and we get into the details of the issues that Antiochus Epiphanes was facing, because if Antiochus Epiphanes was only focused on the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, and their rebellion, they probably would have ended up defeating them. But Antiochus had many other things going on. He had the war with the Ptolemies going on, the Romans, the rise of the Romans, breakaway regions in the east. He had all these things going on. He didn't have time to mess around with this small band of Jewish rebels in Judea. So that's basically why they were defeated. But if you understand the Jewish people, going back to, all of their wars, they were always that is the story of the Jewish people, is that the odds were against them, and they were able to overcome those insurmountable odds and be successful with the help of their God, that their God willed it. Even when they crossed the Jordan for the first time in the first Zionist movement and conquer the Canaanites, if you read the scripture and you understand carefully, they didn't really do anything. God just destroyed the Canaanites for them. You look at the story of David and Goliath. David, this small little boy fighting a giant, that it was God's will that allowed the David to overcome the odds. They were laughing at David when David first entered the ring with Goliath, that it was ridiculous for someone like David to even challenge Goliath. But with the help of God, because God willed it, David's able to. Oh, this is the story of the Jews from the beginning. That even when the battle with Gideon, God tells Gideon to send half of his army home, because you're going to be able to overcome because of the will of God. That we were able to overcome because God willed it. And so that becomes the psychology that the Jews start to adopt after the Maccabean revolt, is that God was the one who allowed us to overcome the Seleucid Empire, to defeat them, to rededicate the temple. That's why we have the holiday of Hanukkah, that it was God's will, that it was all God's will. Even to this day, the 6-Day War in 1967, the odds were completely against Israel. And this psychology is that the odds are against us. We're small, but with God, we can be victorious with God. This is part of it. And again, when Titus Vespasian comes in, we're going to get to that here in a moment. When he comes in and destroys the Second Temple in 70 AD, I told you that was after many different revolting against the Romans, and Vespasian's just like had enough of these guys, because they keep revolting because of the success of the Maccabees against the Seleucid Empire and establishing the Hasmonean dynasty and this 100 years of independence, so to speak. That created this psychology around, that the people of Judea had, is that God delivered us from the Seleucid Empire, and we were able to win, against these insurmountable odds, that if God did that for us against the Greeks, then he'll also do that for us against the Romans. So that's why they kept revolting against the Romans over and over again, all the way to the Bar Kokhba revolt, well into the 2nd century AD. The Romans, even after the temple was destroyed, continue to revolt, because God is going to deliver us from the Romans the way that he did against the Greeks, because God wills it, because we're God's chosen people. So this becomes part of their psychology. And this is what they believe that the Messiah was going to do, that the Messiah is going to come and defeat our enemies and establish the kingdom of David. And that's what they expected the Messiah to do. People, when Judas betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, Judas knew that Jesus was the Messiah. He had been following Jesus throughout his whole ministry. He'd seen Jesus perform all these miracles and everything. He knew he was the Messiah. Why was Judas, betraying Jesus to the Romans? Is because Judas believed that once the Romans arrested him, that Jesus was going to show his power, the same power that he had been using to perform all these miracles, and that he was going to overthrow the Romans and deliver him. Judas believed he was the Messiah, but he believed that the Messiah was going to deliver the Jewish people from the hands of the Romans. Exactly when Jesus was arrested and Pilate brings Jesus out with Barabbas and says, who during Passover we release a prisoner to you. Who should we release, Barabbas or Jesus? And they all yell, release Barabbas. Well, what was Barabbas arrested for? Barabbas was arrested and he was in prison for leading a rebellion against the Romans. So these rebellions, starting with the Maccabean revolt and the psychology and the psychological effect that had on those Jews, because they were able to defeat the Greeks and the Seleucid Empire, and God had delivered this greater Goliath type of army to the smaller army, and we were able to defeat them. God delivered them. Then He'll do the same for the Romans. So they continue to revolt against the Romans. Titus comes in 70 AD and destroys the temple, destroys it. But Jesus had predicted that the temple was going to be destroyed 40 years, around 40 years, about 37 years prior to Titus Vespasian and the Romans destroying the temple. Jesus predicted that. And we were talking about that in the last podcast. I was showing you the passage. It's recorded in several of the Gospels where Jesus is predicting the destruction of the temple. And we're asking the question, why? Why was the temple destroyed? Now I'm gonna get back into that question. But I have a couple of clips that I want to play to get us started here. And I'm going to play this one first. This is of Katie Couric. Take a listen to what she says here.
Hey, everyone. I know it's hard to be shocked these days, but here we are. And this one is a real doozy. Some U.S. military commanders are describing what's happening in Iran as a holy war. Troops have told watchdog groups that they were briefed by commanders who described the war as part of God's divine plan, with references to biblical prophecy. One commander allegedly told his troops that President Trump had been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth.
All right, so
the Council on American-Islamic Relations.
Many people have been reporting this, and I wouldn't take anything that Katie Couric says without it being, collaborated by someone else. I mean, she's an activist, absolutely, but she's right. And many people are reporting this, that American military generals are talking to their soldiers about this war in biblical and spiritual terms, and the fact that we're at a religious war. Same thing you heard Lindsey Graham say. We played Lindsey Graham in the last podcast, say we're at a religious war. Had another senator saying that we have a biblical obligation to support Israel. And Katie Couric is saying, and many people have been reporting, that this is going on within the military, expressing this war in terms of a religious war. And like I told you in the last podcast, and that the theme from the last podcast continues in this podcast, that there are religious fanatics, zealots, religious fundamentalists in Christianity that are Christian zealots, Christian fundamentalists, Christian fanatics, Jews. There are Jewish fanatics, Jewish fundamentalists, Jewish zealots, and then they're Muslim. Now, how many is more? Probably more Muslim fanatics and fundamentalists, I would think, because it's something that's very central to their belief system. I don't know that this stuff is particularly central to Jewish and Christian theology, but it is central to Islamic, if you know anything about Islamic theology. So there's probably more. So there's fanatics, zealots, fundamentalists in all three of the Abrahamic religions. Not all of the people in Christianity, not all the people in Judaism, not all the people in Islam believe this stuff, but there are zealots, fundamentalists, and fanatics in each one of these religions. So Katie Couric is right that you heard the senators in the last podcast that we played, and there's others. You heard Ted Cruz. You've heard many people talk about this war in religious terms. So we're seeing it, and our generals are telling our soldiers that it's, a religious war. But in Iran, they also believe that it's a religious war as well. I played this clip a few podcasts ago about this is CNN, and then CNN right now, the regime has allowed CNN into Iran right now, so they're over there pushing regime propaganda. The CNN is absolutely disgusting. I think it's the same reporter from this report, but this was after we bombed their nuclear sites in June, I believe is June of last year. And look at this. This is a different level of zealot. This is a different level of fanaticism. This is a different level of fundamentalism that you see going on right now. You would never see this in Christianity. You would never see this in Judaism, where women are offering their children as martyrs to die in a holy war. Take a listen to this clip.
Martyrdom is a hugely important concept here in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
So, I don't know if you heard what he says. He says martyrdom. He says martyrdom is important throughout Islam. Sunni, Shia, martyrdom it's not like Christian martyrdom. The concept of martyrdom that is central to Islam, I don't think Westerners really understand it. But this is what it is. This is what these women are saying. They're offering their babies up to be martyrs for Iran. They do this in Gaza. For their cause, for this holy war, that we want to give our baby and our baby's life for this holy war. I mean, this is actually some sick stuff right here.
Martyrdom is a hugely important concept here in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're currently at an event where hundreds of women hold their babies into the air to show that they're willing to offer their children as martyrs for God and for Imam Hussein. All of that.
To offer their children as martyrs for God and for Imam Hussein. Now, who's Imam Hussein? Who's Imam Hussein, people? So Imam Hussein was the son of Ali. Ali was the cousin of Muhammad. When Muhammad dies, this is where the Sunni and Shia sect splits. There were a faction that believed that a blood relative should take over after Muhammad dies, but his general Abu Bakr ends up taking over, and then the ones who follow, the majority of the people follow Abu Bakr, and that becomes the Sunni sect. But the small sect that follows Ali and then his son Hussein, he becomes the first imam. Now, Shia Islam in Iran, they believe in a different theology. They believe in it's not a different theology, but a different eschatology and theology. They have a different theology and eschatology, but their eschatology is all about this, what is known as 12therism, that the 12th imam is going to be their Messiah. They believe in Shia Islam, they believe in a Messiah, and their Messiah is this 12th imam. Well, Hussein who did it say?
Their children as martyrs for God and for Imam Hussein.
So Imam Hussein is the first imam, and then they're waiting on the 12th imam, who the 12th imam is their Messiah. So they're offering their children up as sacrifices, as martyrs, their children, holding them up as sacrifices, as martyrs to the first Imam Hussein.
Hugely important concept here in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're currently at an event where hundreds of women hold their babies into the air to show that they're willing to offer their children as martyrs.
Offer their children.
Imam Hussein. All of that goes back to the legendary.
Yeah, this is the same guy that's over there right now. This guy's over there right now. They gave him a special permission to come in, and he's over there pushing regime propaganda. Seriously. The regime is controlling the propaganda that we're seeing come out of Iran right now. They're really putting in an effort. with their propaganda. And then so CNN goes over there and they give this guy a visa to report, but they're controlling what he says. Everybody's making fun of CNN for over there pushing regime propaganda.
We're currently at an event where hundreds of women hold their babies into the air to show that they're willing to offer their children as martyrs for God and for Imam Hussein. All of that goes back to the legendary Battle of Karbala, where Imam Hussein held his baby into the air, asking the enemy that was besieging Karbala to give the baby water, and instead the enemy killed the baby. Now, there's nothing more glorious here than dying as a martyr.
There's nothing more glorious here than dying as a martyr. That's Islam, people. That's Islam. You don't, I mean, if you have a Western mindset and you enjoy life and, you don't think like these Stone Age people, this is what we're talking, I mean, this is what we're up against. That, we have some religious fanatics in Judaism, some zealots in Judaism. Absolutely. So in Christianity too, we have some religious zealots and fanatics in Christianity, but nothing like this. And this is crazy. So the way the zealous fanaticism is expressed, even though you have zealots and fanatics in each religion, the way that the fanaticism and the zeal is expressed in each of these religions is different. Like in Islam, because of this situation of martyrdom, and it's a bloodthirsty religion from the beginning anyway, going back to Muhammad from the very beginning is a bloodthirsty religion. But yeah, I mean, this is different. So the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, that there are people in Israel telling their soldiers, you're going to see here in a moment, that this is a religious war. There's people in America telling their soldiers, this is a religious war. And there's people in Iran telling their people, this is a religious war. Give your children, this poor baby, offer your children up as a sacrifice for Imam Hussein.
That was besieging Karbala to give the baby water, and instead the enemy killed the baby. Now, there's nothing more glorious here than dying as a martyr. And of course, right now, that concept takes on an even more important meaning as Iran is involved in this massive struggle with Israel and the United States.
We want to show them we are not scared of anything, she says, and will support our state until they are destroyed. And she says they need to know that Imam Hussein is our everything, and we should sacrifice our lives for Imam Hussein. This is a symbol saluting Imam Hussein, she says, who's the leader of all the oppressed who stand against oppressors and don't submit.
And just
Imam Hussein been dead for 700 years, and they're willing to sacrifice their children for Imam Hussein. So this is what we're dealing with, people. We're dealing with religious zealots, religious fanatics, religious fundamentalists on all sides. All right, let's get back to talking about the temple and the rebuilding of the third temple. We're going to get back into the Tucker Carlson monologue that we listened to in the last podcast, because quite frankly, Tucker Carlson gets a lot of it right. Tucker Carlson, particularly theologically speaking, he gets a lot of it right. He's been studying his Bible, I tell you that. So we're going to get back into that. But before we get back into that, I want to talk about why. Why was first of all, why was Solomon's temple destroyed? What's the practical reason that Solomon's temple was destroyed? And then what's the biblical, scriptural, reason that Solomon's temple was destroyed, based on the Hebrew scriptures, the spiritual reason. And we're going to ask the question about the second temple, as well. Why was the second temple destroyed? Why did Cyrus Vespasian destroy the second temple? We've been talking about it, but we're going to reiterate it. The practical reason that the Romans went in and destroyed the second temple, and the spiritual reason according to the Bible. So we've been talking about the fact that there are three different Zionist movements. There's been three different Zionist movements, and each Zionist movement was produced a temple or will produce a temple. The first Zionist movement, and my definition of Zionism again is the migration of Jews from outside of Zion into Zion. So that's my definition of Zionism. Zionism is a place that you're looking at here on the screen. Zion is a place, and there have been 3 movements of Jewish people migrating from outside of Zion into Zion. The first movement, the first Zionist movement, was Moses leading the children of Israel, the Hebrew people, out of Egypt through the wilderness to the Jordan, and then Joshua leads them over the Jordan into Zion. That is the first Zionist movement, which produced the Temple of Solomon's temple later on. They were under the tabernacle, and then Solomon builds Solomon's temple, which stands for 1,000 years, and it's destroyed by Babylon. Why was Solomon's temple destroyed? Practical reason and the spiritual reason. And the practical reason is that the king of Judah at the time was he was tentatively making an alliance with Egypt. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to flex his power on everyone in the region, and Judah just fell to him because the king of Judah at that time, Nebuchadnezzar, felt that he had betrayed them. But Nebuchadnezzar had already made the kingdom of Judah a client state. So that's the practical reason. The spiritual reason, according to the Hebrew text, why was Solomon's temple destroyed? So let's go to the text. And what we're going to go to is 2 Kings, the 22nd chapter. And this is when the king of Judah, Josiah, is the king. And I recommend you go and read. We don't have time to read all of this, and what goes on with Josiah, but I'm going to just try to condense it real quick. And so it says that then Shaphan, the secretary, informed the king, Hilkiah, the priest, has given me a book. So they go into the temple after they cleanse the temple, because before Josiah becomes king, the king before Josiah desecrates the temple, and then Manasseh before him. Also, we're going to get into Manasseh, desecrates the temple, brings in idols into the temple. Everything that Antiochus Epiphanes does to desecrate the temple centuries later, that brought about the Maccabean revolt. These Jewish kings did before, particularly Manasseh. So, but then Josiah becomes king, and he cleanses the temple of all of the idol worship and all of the mediums and the witches and stuff that Manasseh had brought. He kills all of them. And then the high priest at this time is this guy, Hilkiah, and the high priest finds a book in the temple, and he brings the book to Josiah, and it's a book of the law. It's the book of Deuteronomy. It's one of the 5 books of Moses, one of the books of the Torah, and they bring it and they read to King Josiah from this book. And then after they read from this book, then from Deuteronomy, Josiah rips his clothes in shame. Right here it says that when the king heard the words from the book of the law, he tore his robes. He gave this orders for Kahiah the priest, Acham, son of Shaphan. So go and inquire of the Lord for me. He's telling him to go to the prophet, inquire of the Lord for me and the people of Judah about what is written in the book that has been found. So anyway, so there's something that they read to Josiah and from the book of the law, from the book of Deuteronomy, that makes him rip his clothes in shame. So there's several different passages from Deuteronomy that I believe that could have been read to Josiah at this time, but I believe it could have been the fourth chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses is telling the children of Israel before they even go in this first Zionist movement, as they're going into the promised land and crossing over the Jordan. Even before they cross over the Jordan, Moses gives them this warning to not set up any idols. He says, so don't become corrupt. Don't make for yourselves any idols of man, of any birds that fly in the air. The Lord was angry with me because, so this is what Moses, he says, after you've had children and grandchildren, Moses telling the children of Israel in this first Zionist movement before they crossed the Jordan into the land, after you've had children and grandchildren and lived in the land a long time, if you then become corrupt and make any kind of idol, doing evil in the sight of God, in the sight of the Lord your God, and arouse his anger, I call the heavens and the earth as a witness against you this day, that you will quickly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You will not live there long. You will certainly be destroyed. The Lord will scatter you amongst the people, and only a few of you will survive, the Lord says. So this is what I believe was read to Josiah years later, and that's why he rips his clothes. He's like, woe is me, that the king before me, going back to Manasseh, they just desecrated the temple. They set up idols in the temple. There's all this idol worship going on in Judea. There's these mediums and witches everywhere. And woe is me, is what Josiah said. That's why he ripped his clothes. So then Josiah, after ripping his clothes, after whatever they read from him from Deuteronomy, and tell him, look, that you set up idols, you did exactly what Moses told you not to do. So he makes a new covenant. He cleans the temple. Then king ordered Hilkiah, the high priest, and the priests in next ranks, and the doorkeepers to remove from the temple of the Lord all the articles made from Baal and Asherah, because Manasseh had put up idols to Baal and Asherah in the temple, and all the starry hosts, the same thing that Moses told them not to do, they did. They set up all that in the temple in Jerusalem. He burned them outside of Jerusalem in the fields in Kidron Valley, and took the ashes to Bethel. He did away with the adulterous priests appointed by the kings of Judah that were before him, that desecrated the temple, set up all these idols, and burned incense to the high places of the towns of Judah, and aroused and those around Jerusalem, those who burn incense to Baal, and the sun and the moon and the constellations, all the stuff that Moses in Deuteronomy told them not to do. We're asking the question, why, spiritually speaking, according to the scripture, why was Solomon's temple destroyed? Right here. Right here. He took the Asherah pole from the temple. They had set up an Asherah pole, an obelisk is what this is. They set up an obelisk in the temple. So Josiah took that down after reading from Deuteronomy. He also tore down the quarters of the male shrine prostitutes. They set up shrines to prostitute in Judea. The Jewish king did this. Not Antiochus Epiphanes, not a Gentile. These are Jews doing this in Jerusalem, in the temple, setting up shrines to prostitutes. We're in the temple of the Lord, the quarters where women did weaving for Asherah. Josiah brought all of the priests from the towns of Judah and desecrated that. They desecrated the high places. He broke down the gateway of the entrance of the gate of Joshua. So basically, after reading what was in that Moses had warned them not to do, and then what they'd done, and reading that in Deuteronomy, Josiah comes and he tears down all these, idols and everything, rededicates the temple to the one true God and everything. And then it says this. Where does it say this? Started ordering the people to start celebrating Passover again. So basically Josiah comes along after these kings had basically led the people into idol worship and he had desecrated the temple. And then so Josiah is trying to repair things and to rededicate the people and the temple after it had been desecrated. Same thing that happens in Hanukkah. The only difference is that instead of a Jewish king doing it then, doing it in this instance here, when it was Manasseh, it was Antiochus Epiphanes that did it, and there were Gentiles that did it. But the same thing happens. They have to rededicate the temple. They have to do all the stuff. They have to sacrifice the red heifer and all that stuff to rededicate the temple. They have to do all that stuff after Manasseh. Josiah had to do all that stuff. But it says right here, this is the one that I want to get to right here. But start at the 25th verse. Neither before or after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did. Basically, Josiah had to turn everything around and get rid of all the mediums and the witches and the idols and all that stuff and cleanse the place from what had happened before him with Manasseh. This is what it says. We're asking a question. Why was Solomon's temple destroyed? The northern 10 tribes had already been destroyed for the same reason, too. The Assyrians had already destroyed the northern 10 tribes. 25th verse. Neither before or after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did with all of his heart and with all of his soul and with all of his strength and in accordance with all of the law of Moses. That basically Josiah had turned everything around and brought the people back from idol worship that Moses had warned them about. And Josiah was a good king who honored the Lord. 26th verse. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his furnace anger, which burnt against Judah because of all that Manasseh had done to arouse his anger. Manasseh had made God so angry that even though Josiah had turned the people back, and even though Josiah had killed the mediums and the witches and the priests of Baal and tore down the statues of Baal and all this stuff and rededicated the temple, nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his furnace anger that burned against Judah. Not because Manasseh did it, but burnt against Judah because of all that Manasseh had done to arouse his anger. For the Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my presence as I removed Israel. The northern 10 tribes. The northern 10 tribes had already been conquered by the Assyrians for the same reason, because Jeroboam had set up idols and where they worship idols up there. So the Assyrians had already taken. So God is telling Josiah, even though Josiah, you're turning the people back to me and getting rid of the idols and everything, I'm still angry at Judah because of Messiah. Lord said, I will remove Judah from my presence as I removed Israel. I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose as the temple, as his temple. Let me read that again. Very important. So the Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my presence as I removed Israel, and I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and this temple about which I said, my name shall be. So God is rejecting the temple. He's saying, I'm going to remove Judah. So spiritually speaking, the reason that Solomon's temple was destroyed was because of their disobedience, because of God was angry because Manasseh had set up idols to bow in the temple and shrines to prostitutes in the temple. And they had witchcraft and mediums going on. So God was angry at Judah, and God allowed. And so just like you say that God is the reason that the Maccabees were able to defeat the Seleucid Empire, that God willed that. Well, God willed that the Babylonians destroy Judah and destroy the temple, that it was God's will. It was God's will that the Assyrians destroy the northern 10 tribes and the kingdom of Israel. It was God's will. Just like God willed David to defeat Goliath, God willed the Assyrians to defeat the northern 10 tribes and to take them into exile. God willed the Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians to destroy Judah, destroy the temple, and take them into exile. So then after the first Zionist movement produced the Temple of Solomon, Solomon's temple was destroyed. Jews were taken into exile. And then after exile, Cyrus the Great gives the decree of Cyrus, allows them to come back, rebuild the second temple under Zerubbabel in 70 AD. The second temple is destroyed. Why was the second temple destroyed? There's a practical reason and there is a spiritual reason. Well, the practical reason is because I've told you that they kept revolting again and again against the Romans. And they were such a headache and a nuisance to the Romans because they continued to revolt over and over again that Titus just wanted to come in and put an end to these people because they continued to revolt against the Roman Empire. And they were such a headache to the Roman Empire because they continued to revolt. That's the practical reason. Spiritually speaking, now, the Jews don't believe in the New Testament. They don't believe in the Gospels. But if you're a Christian, the Gospels are clear why the second temple was destroyed. The second temple was destroyed, spiritually speaking, and we read it in the last podcast, because the Jews did not recognize Jesus as Messiah. Because they rejected Jesus as Messiah is why the second temple was destroyed. Why Titus Vespasian, spiritually speaking, according to the scriptures, if you are a Christian who believes in the Gospels, the reason the second temple was destroyed, because they rejected Jesus and did not recognize Jesus as Messiah. Now, many of the Jews did recognize Jesus as Messiah. That's why they were celebrating when he comes into Jerusalem and saying, they were actually chanting, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in its highest. This is what they were yelling. And the Sanhedrin and the priests were trying to quiet the people and tell them, don't say that, it's blasphemy. But this is what they were saying. So many of the Jews did recognize him as Messiah, but there were many of the Jews didn't, and they were being led by the high priest. And those were the ones that were screaming for Barabbas when Jesus was arrested. And it says here, right here, if you're a Christian, this is what the reason why the second temple was destroyed. And when Jesus drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you Jews, had known on this day that things that make for peace. It's the thing, they want peace. It's all about peace. Maybe if you would have known this day, the things that make for peace, it's right in front of you. But now they are hidden from your eyes, for the days will come when you come upon you, when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and will surround you and hem you up on every side and tear down to the ground, you, your children within you, and they will not leave a stone upon another in you, because you did not know, because. Why is this going to happen, Jesus? Because you did not know the time of your visitation, meaning that you did not recognize me as Messiah. This is also recorded in other Gospels, and other Gospels give more information. The Gospel of John, which we're going to listen, we'll get back to John here in a moment. Let's listen to Tucker Carlson. Oh, I was going to show you. This is Manasseh of Judah. Let me show you what it says here. Manasseh of Judah is the king that we're talking about that made God angry. He's the eldest son of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the king during the Assyrian captivity of the northern 10 tribes. And then Manasseh comes along. And this is what it says, his religious policies. There are three aspects of Manasseh's religious policies, which are written in Kings, considered deplorable. Set up polytheistic worship to Baal and Asherah and other occult monuments and shrines that he set up. So that's why the temple was destroyed. Anyway, let's get back to Tucker. How much time do I have? Geez, man, I only have 15 more minutes. Oh, man. All right, so we're going to pick this back up on Friday for sure, because I haven't even gotten into Let's listen to Tucker here.
So that is at the very center of Judaism. I mean, physically the center of Judaism, that spot, that exact spot over the foundation stone, and Islam. And it has been occupied by a mosque. A mosque has been sitting there since the 7th century, since the late 600s. Amazing. You may be dimly aware of this. Now, why go on at length about this? Because now is the moment, right now, like this week, is the moment that some people, not a huge number, most people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, are not fully aware of all this.
It's not a huge number. It's not a huge number. It's a small group of fanatics, zealots, and fundamentalists in each group, but it's not the majority. And I don't know how big the group is in Judaism, how big the group is in Christianity or Islam, but it's not everyone, is what Tucker says, and I agree with him.
Of this, now, why go on at length about this? Because now is the moment, right now, like this week, is the moment that some people, not a huge number, most people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, are not fully aware of all this, but some people are highly aware of it and would like to begin the process of tearing down the Dome of the Rock, tearing down Al-Aqsa Mosque, and rebuilding the Third Temple. Now, there are a lot of things to say about this, about its likelihood, the potential effects of it. But first, just a quick side note on the theology of this from a Christian point of view. Now, it was Jesus who said this temple will be torn down, shocking everyone around him. If it's in the Gospels, it's in at least a couple of the Gospels. And the people who heard it just couldn't believe it. And of course, the people running the temple, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, were gravely offended by it. Why wouldn't they be? But then it happened. Less than 40 years later, it actually happened. He was right. He called it. And so from a Christian perspective, he did that. God called for the destruction of the temple. And as Jesus says plainly in the Gospels, I'm the temple. I'm the temple now. The temple will be rebuilt after 3 days. When I'm resurrected, I am the new temple.
So what Tucker's talking about here is the Gospel of John, which is the another gospel where the same story of Jesus predicting the temple being destroyed is recorded. And he's right. Jesus says that I am the temple, but Jesus wasn't saying that Jesus is the temple. He was saying that man is the temple. Man's going to be the new temple. That's basically what he's saying there. So that's in the Gospel of John. This is the 2nd chapter of John. And then it says, Jesus clears the temple. This is when he drives out the money changers. And I told you, going back to the period of time of the Maccabean revolt, that the priesthood and the high priest position had already been very much corrupted. It was a political position and also a spiritual position. And the priesthood, they were basically taking advantage of the people there at the temple. If you read this, that's why Jesus, whips the money changers and drives them out of the temple, because they're using the temple for profit and basically to take advantage of the people. And the Jews responded to him saying, what sign can you show us to prove you have an authority to do this, to drive us out of the temple? Jesus answered to them, destroy this temple and I will rise it up again in 3 days. Of course, Jesus isn't going to be able to raise the temple. So they say, this is the priesthood after Jesus drives them out of the temple. And he says that destroy this temple, and because they're asking for a sign, show us a sign that you have the authority to do this. He says, destroy this temple and I'll raise it up again in 3 days. He wasn't talking about the Zerubbabel's temple. He wasn't talking about the temple. He was talking about him as the temple, his body as the temple, and that he says, you want a sign? When you destroy this temple, I'm going to raise it up again in 3 days. That's going to be your sign. They replied to him after saying that, not understanding what he was saying, that it's taken 46 years to build this temple. You're going to raise it up again in 3 days? You're crazy. But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said, and then they believed. And so, that's what he was talking about, basically. So that's what Tucker is talking about here when Jesus says that I'm the temple. He's basically talking about man, because Jesus was manifest as a man. He's basically representing himself as a man. That man is the temple. This is the evolution of what Judaism was from the beginning, what it set out to do from the beginning was for the presence of God to be able to dwell inside of men. That's what Paul says. And again, reiterating this in 1 Corinthians, in the 3rd chapter of 1 Corinthians and the 16th verse, it says right here, this is Paul writing to the church. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, that God's Spirit dwells in your midst, that God lives inside of you? This is what Pentecost was about. Pentecost could only happen after Jesus had paid the price of sin, the atonement, the same system that God set up for the Jews to atone. That's what the temple was for atonement, that Jesus became the atonement. And then after the atonement, you had Pentecost. You had the Spirit of God living inside of men. That's what the concept, this is what Christians believe, that we are the temple. Not Jesus himself is the temple, that man is the temple and that God lives inside of us. That's what Paul says here. Do you not know that you yourselves are God's temple and that the Spirit dwells in your midst? If any man destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person, and God's temple is sacred, and you together, the church is the temple. This is what I said. I said this a few podcasts ago, that people talk about replacement theology and what replacement theology is, and how wrong it is to say that the church replaced the Jews. No, the church didn't replace the Jews. That's the wrong replacement theology. The church replaced the temple. The church is the new temple. And I'll stand on that. There's no need. There's no need for a new temple at this point after Jesus, because man is the temple. Man and woman are the temple, that God dwells inside man and women. This is what Paul says, and it's reiterated all over again. So that's what Jesus is talking about, what Tucker is making reference here to, where Jesus says that I'm the temple. And Paul says that we're all the temple, that we're the temple. There's no need for a physical temple anymore.
But there has been at least one attempt in the last 2,000 years to rebuild a physical third temple, and it happened in the 4th century. And it happened, without getting too far afield, shortly after the death of Constantine. Now, Constantine was the 4th century Roman emperor who converted to Christianity and very famously turned the Roman Empire Christian, thereby spreading Christianity basically instantly across the West, where it's remained, more or less, ever since. That was in the 300s, the 4th century. Now, his nephew became emperor not long after he died, and his name was Julian, referred to very often by Christian historians as Julian the Apostate, and he was an apostate. He was the last non-Christian emperor of Rome, of the Roman Empire. And he had been born a Christian apparently, but he was a fairly enthusiastic pagan, polytheist, and very aggressively opposed to Christianity. And for that reason, Julian the Apostate decided in 363 to rebuild the third temple. So it has been tried. For those who are thinking, could this ever happen? Oh, it happened. They tried to rebuild. He spent a ton of money doing it.
So I didn't know anything about this story. I knew who Julian Apostate was. I mean, my study of history, and I knew very well who Julian the Apostate was. Julian the Apostate, he was born to a Christian family, but they were on the eastern part of the empire. He studied, just like Alexander the Great, Greek philosophy. He was very smart and intelligent, and he rejected this new religion that his family had just adopted. His uncle, Constantine, I mean, this was the first time that Christianity was accepted in the Roman Empire, and then Constantine becomes a Christian and just makes the whole empire Christian. But before that, it was a pagan empire, very pagan, and Julian wanted to turn the empire back to paganism. He made he huge effort to turn the empire back to paganism. He was unsuccessful, but I never knew that Julian tried to rebuild the temple, the third temple in the 4th century. But it turns out that he did, and actually learned that from watching Tucker Carlson here, and very interesting.
63.
So after watching Tucker Carlson, tell me about Julian the Apostate trying to rebuild the third temple, I saw this clip, and this is from the Sean Ryan podcast. And last week, Sean Ryan released a podcast where he interviewed this Catholic priest and an exorcist, Father Chad Piperger. And I want you to listen to what Father Piperger says here.
What about the temple?
According to the fathers of the church, at least the ones that I've read, they said the temple will never be rebuilt. And
It will never be
rebuilt. And the reason being is because, first of all, Julian the Apostate tried to rebuild it, and it was destroyed in the process. Christ actually put an end to the Jewish sacrifice on purpose, because the Jewish sacrifice in the Old Testament was a lead-up or a prefigurement of Christ. Mm-hmm. And so he gave them one generation in order for them to convert to Christianity. And when they didn't, he put an end to their sacrifice. So technically speaking, there hasn't been practicing Jews in 2,000 years, because the temple hasn't been around. They haven't been able to offer sacrifice. Doesn't mean that they don't pray and things of that sort, but they haven't been.
They do offer sacrifices. Again, I was telling you in the last podcast, you'll see this in Jewish neighborhoods in New York, all over the world during Yom Kippur. Them with the chickens, putting the chickens over their head, transferring their sins to the chicken, sacrificing the chicken. They still offer sacrifices, but they're not offering temple sacrifices, which are specific type of sacrifices. They don't do that anymore. So I just wanted to clarify that.
One generation in order for them to convert to Christianity. And when they didn't, he put an end to their sacrifice. So technically speaking, there hasn't been practicing Jews in 2,000 years, because the temple hasn't been around. They haven't been able to offer sacrifice. Doesn't mean that they don't pray and things of that sort, but they haven't been able to enact their primary religious duties, which is to offer sacrifice. Plus their Levitic line, which is their priestly line, was destroyed. So, but now they have a new priest line. Difficulties.
The Sanhedrin, they have a new Sanhedrin. This is why all this stuff is important that I've been telling you over the past few months. I'm telling you about the new Sanhedrin, new Sanhedrin that wrote Trump a letter asking him to create a new international framework based on the Noahide laws. So they do have a new priesthood and a new high priest. So the priesthood is there. I'm just correcting what he's saying, but it's very interesting that Tucker Carlson starts talking about Julian the Apostate in his podcast, and then Sean Ryan has that priest on talking about Julian Apostate too. I want you to listen. I don't have very much more time. We're definitely going to pick this back up, but I want you to listen to the rest of what Tucker says about what Julian Apostate. It goes back to the father there. What the father is talking about when he says that they can't build the temple again. This is what happened to Julian the Apostate.
What happened next? Well, let's read the account of the only attempt ever made at rebuilding the third temple. And this comes from a personal friend of Julian the Apostate who wrote it contemporaneously. And we still have it, amazingly, all these years later. I'm quoting. Julian thought to rebuild at an extravagant expense the proud temple once at Jerusalem, and committed this task to Alypius of Antioch. Alypius set vigorously to work and was seconded by a governor of the province. When fearful balls of fire, breaking out near the foundations of the building, continued their attacks till the workmen, after repeated scorchings, could approach no more. And he gave up the attempt. By the way, just a few months later, Emperor Julian the Apostate was killed. You know what he was killed doing? Invading Iran.
Tucker, I swear, man. So yes, this is what the father is talking about, that there was something supernatural preventing Julian the Apostate from rebuilding the second temple when he tried in the 4th century. And
Strictly speaking,
Father's time.
there hasn't been practicing Jews in 2,000 years because the temple hasn't been around. They haven't been able to offer sacrifice. Doesn't mean that they don't pray and things of that sort, but they haven't been able to enact their primary religious duties, which is to offer sacrifice. Plus, their Levitic line, which is their priestly line, was destroyed. So, but then, and the difficulty is people tend to misinterpret the book of Daniel, which says when the abomination of desolation takes its seat in the temple. What they don't realize is that is not a reference to the Jewish temple. That's where the Protestants are getting it wrong. So a lot of the Protestants are thinking, oh, well, let's help the Jews rebuild the temple, and then that will usher in, because Christ is going to return, after they think the temple is going to be rebuilt. And then as a result of that, the temple has to be rebuilt in order for the Antichrist to put himself in there. So let's do that so that the Antichrist will come, and then that means that Christ will come, and that's kind of their reasoning behind it.
That's what he's talking about. He's talking about the dispensational belief of Christian Zionists. That's what he's talking about.
First of all,
and he's saying that there are Christians that are longing, that Christians that want the third temple to be rebuilt, because they believe that when the third temple is rebuilt, that you're getting closer to the things that have to happen for Jesus to return. So they're actually Christian zealots, fundamentalists, fanatics that are actually longing for the third temple and that are pushing for the third temple to rebuild. So that's the Christian fundamentalist, zealot, fanatic part. And there are Jews that are as fanatical, as zealous and about rebuilding the third temple. Absolutely. Now, should Christians be? Is it a Christian theological? Is it Christian to want the third temple? That's the question that we're going to talk about in the next podcast. We're going to talk about, theologically speaking, as a Christian, should you be longing for the third temple and the rebuilding of the third temple? And like I said, we'll pick this back up on Friday with that question, answering that question. Hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on Friday.